Every Christmas Eve, my family has a tradition. We gather at my grandmother's old house in the countryside. The house, built in the late 1800s, has always been a little eerie. It's big, drafty, and creaks with every gust of wind. But it's also home, and we never thought much of it. This year, things were different. It was my first Christmas after my grandfather passed away. He had always been the life of the party, with his loud laugh and endless stories. Without him, the house felt empty, even with all of us there. Grandma seemed especially quiet, sitting in her favorite chair by the fireplace, staring into the flames. After dinner, we settled in the living room. The Christmas tree twinkled, and the smell of cinnamon filled the air. My younger cousins played on the floor, while the adults chatted. I sat by the window, looking out at the snow-covered fields. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a figure standing by the edge of the woods, barely visible under the moonlight. At first, I thought it was a deer or some animal, but as I squinted, I realized it was a person. They were tall and thin, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned coat. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, pointing toward the window. My dad walked over and looked. "I don't see anything," he said, shrugging. "It's probably just a shadow." I tried to shake it off, but something didn't feel right. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. I kept thinking about the figure by the woods. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to look out the window again. The figure was closer. They were standing in the middle of the field now, motionless. My heart raced. Who would be out there in the freezing cold at this hour? I grabbed my phone and tried to zoom in, but the camera couldn't capture much in the darkness. Suddenly, the figure tilted its head, as if it knew I was watching. I jumped back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. My first thought was to wake someone up, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, I locked my bedroom door and crawled under the covers, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I woke up to a faint tapping sound. It was slow and rhythmic, like someone gently knocking. My heart pounded as I realized it was coming from the window. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I turned my head and froze. The figure was at the window. Their face was pale, almost ghostly, and their eyes, if you could call them that, were completely black. They didn't move, just stared at me through the glass. I was paralyzed with fear. Then, they lifted a bony hand and pointed toward the door. I heard the floorboards creak outside my room. I scrambled out of bed and pressed myself against the door, holding the knob with all my strength. The creaking grew louder, and then the doorknob started to turn. I screamed, and within seconds my dad and uncle burst into the room, turning on the lights. "What's going on?" my dad asked, his face pale. Something was at the window," I stammered, pointing. They rushed to the window and looked outside, but the figure was gone. All that was left were footprints in the snow, leading back to the woods. The rest of the night was a blur. We stayed up together, too scared to sleep. In the morning, we followed the footprints, hoping to find an explanation. They led deep into the woods, stopping at an old, abandoned well. There was no sign of anyone, but the air around the well felt cold, colder than the rest of the forest. Grandma later told us about an old family story. Decades ago, a man had gone missing in those woods during a snowstorm. They said he had been looking for his daughter, who had fallen into the well. Some believe his spirit still roams, searching for her. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I'll never forget that face at the window, or the way it pointed to my door. That Christmas Eve left me with a fear of windows at night and a memory I'll carry forever. A year later, I decided to stay home for Christmas. My family understood the previous year had shaken me more than I let on, but on Christmas Eve, as midnight approached, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. I kept my curtains drawn and the lights on, refusing to look outside. Around 11:50 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from my cousin Emily, who was back at Grandma's house with the rest of the family. "Is this a joke?" she texted. Confused, I replied, "What do you mean?" She sent a photo. It was taken from the living room at Grandma's house. In the picture, everyone was sitting together, laughing and opening presents. But in the background, through the large bay window, a pale figure stood, staring in. Its face was pressed against the glass, black eyes gleaming in the light from the Christmas tree. My heart stopped. I called her immediately, but she didn't answer. Instead, I got another text. "They're inside now." Panic consumed me as I tried calling my dad, my uncle, anyone. No one answered. I thought about driving over, but I was frozen with fear. Then, as the clock struck midnight, there was a knock at my door. It was slow and deliberate, just like the tapping I had heard the year before. My breath hitched as I stared at the door. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't ignore it either. Gathering all the courage I had, I grabbed a baseball bat and crept toward the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time. I swung the door open, ready to defend myself, but there was no one there. Just an empty porch and a trail of footprints leading away, disappearing into the snowy darkness. On the ground, where the footsteps began, was a single old-fashioned coat button, dusted with snow. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. I didn't sleep that night. And when I finally got through to my family the next morning, they acted as if nothing had happened. They remembered celebrating, but no one recalled the figure in the window or the text messages I'd received. Emily swore she never sent them. I've stopped going to Grandma's house for Christmas, but every year, without fail, I get a text on Christmas Eve. It's always the same. A photo of the family by the tree with a pale figure in the background, watching. It was Christmas Eve and I was home alone. My parents had left to visit my grandparents in another town, but I stayed behind because of work. I didn't mind. I enjoyed the peace and quiet. The house felt cozy with the Christmas tree lights twinkling and a soft snow was falling outside. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A soft knock at the front door. Strange, I thought, since it was late and I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole, but saw nothing. Assuming it was just the wind rattling something, I went back to the couch. A few minutes later, the knock came again, this time louder. I froze. This wasn't normal. Heart pounding, I slowly approached the door and looked through the peephole again. This time, I saw a figure standing there. A man wearing a red Santa suit. His beard was fake, and his suit looked old and dirty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Merry Christmas," he said cheerfully, but something about his voice felt off. It was too raspy, too unnatural. "I'm not opening the door," I said firmly. He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, I'm not here to hurt you. I just have a gift for you." "No, thank you. Please leave." The man stood there, unmoving. Then he bent down and placed a small box on the doorstep before walking away into the snow. I waited until I was sure he was gone before opening the door to grab the box. It was wrapped in old crinkled paper and had no tag. Curiosity got the better of me, so I unwrapped it. Inside was a small snow globe with a perfect replica of my house inside it. I stared at it, confused and uneasy. As I shook it, tiny snowflakes swirled around the miniature house. That's when I noticed something. There was a tiny figure standing in front of the house inside the globe, wearing a Santa suit. I dropped the snow globe and it shattered on the floor. I stepped back, breathing hard, when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Knock. Knock. It was coming from the back door. Grabbing a kitchen knife, I slowly approached the back door and peeked through the curtain. The man in the Santa suit was standing there, grinning at me. He held another box, tapping it against the glass. This time, I didn't wait. I ran upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and called the police. They told me to stay put and wait for officers to arrive. I sat on the floor, clutching the knife, when I heard a creak from downstairs. My heart sank. Someone was inside the house. I held my breath as I heard slow, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. Then the doorknob to my bedroom jiggled. "Let me in," the man said, his voice sing-song. The police arrived just in time. They found me trembling in my room, but when they searched the house, the man was gone. They found no footprints leading away from the house, only the shattered snow globe on the floor. I moved out a week later, but the story doesn't end there. This Christmas, I received a package in the mail. It was a snow globe. Inside was my new apartment, and standing in front of it was a tiny figure in a Santa suit.